Tricia, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure to finally be here, Alejandro.
Great. So, just so that we understand a little bit more about you, um, tell us exactly what it is that you study and why it's so important.
Sure. I study early human infant development, specialize in the first year, focus on cognitive development. I like to sum it up as how babies learn. So I'm looking at typical development for the most part. And though this has implications for atypical development, that's what I focus on. I
Gotcha.
use a combination of behavioral techniques, and I've also looked at brain measures such as event-related potentials to sort of assess how babies are learning from others, how they learn to communicate, how they learn about their world, and yeah.
Great. Fascinating. Awesome. And what brought you to study psychology? What this is something that, that I also studied psychology and I have my reasons, and I feel everybody has their very particular reasons that drive them to study. There's some jokes about that. It's about how, you study psychology to find out which side of the wall you should be on. But that's
Yeah,
what drove you.
probably a bad grade in organic chemistry in part. I was a pre-med. I think I was always attracted to research.
Okay.
And I took a couple of courses in psychology. I did the classic switch of major,
Hmm.
and I think that's essentially what happened. I thought, okay, well, what else? It just sort of came to me. All right.
Hmm.
I think I'm one of the few psychologists who never took a course in clinical psychology, still to this
Hmm.
day. And when I was a senior, I took a course in child development. Because why? The classic reason, it fit into my schedule. So right, and that's essentially how it happened. We hit chapter 6 of the book, learning and perception in infants, and I just thought this was so fascinating that you could figure out what was happening in a baby's brain, or with these like sort of nonverbal behaviors. I think it's sort
Hmm.
of I guess if you think about the biology major as well, it started to then sort of overlap, right? There's a lot of
Hmm.
overlap
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
biology and the psychology, but in a nutshell, it really happened by accident. And the sort of the with the nonverbal infants too. Oh, I just still to this day, like, it's something that lights me up, right? I can walk down the
Excellent.
streets in New York and I'll see little babies in their carriages. I can't stop sort of you know tr- watching them, and
Yeah.
so that's really what happened.
That's
As a
fascinating. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, because and it's I can't help but think at I remember when I was doing developmental, I also there was a for that course was so fascinating to me that at that point I thought that might be a direction that I wanted to go. And I specifically remember Piaget and how I remember thinking it was hilarious that part of the way the ways that he developed his theories was just by observing his children and just kind of like essentially using them as his main source. And yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Never, of course, you think you're taking a course in developmental psychology or cognitive development, and someone's going to be teaching you this is how to raise children, and not
Yeah,
really, so it's good to be open-minded. That's one lesson for
absolutely.
the younger generation thinking of majors and careers.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was wondering because you do study. I understand, that as you mentioned, you study cognition, right? Specifically looking at the cognition in the early stages. What can you tell us about the early? What are the first signs of what we would call the self? When does that appear to begin to emerge?
I suppose it depends on how we're going to define the
Hmm.
self.
Yeah.
But I would the first thing that comes to my mind is really in utero. Once
Okay.
the
Wow.
fetus begins, moving, touching, sucking the thumb in utero, and we have that's potentially early signs of self, right? Will the
Yeah.
fetus differentiate its own thumb sucking, let's say, from something else, touching it from the external, internal,
Mm.
things like that. So those are certainly early, um, signs of self. All right. And then you can
Okay.
compare that to something like later in development with like the classic Rouge test, right? We
Okay.
put a little mark on the baby's forehead, and then the baby goes in, 18-month-olds, pre 18 months or so. Does a baby like recognize, hey, that's me, try to take that mark off of their face, or
Right.
or not? So that's like and we know around 18 months, babies start showing, successfully sort of passing the Rouge task. There's
So 18 months appears to be this around
that's a
18 months.
trend
That's a transition phase.
in
Wow,
terms of that
fascinating.
test, yes.
Yeah.
But there are some other studies that we've done with younger babies, say, 6 to 9 months. So maybe they're watching themselves on a video, and either seeing themselves like live or with like a delay of a couple of seconds, or looking at another baby who's like kind of matching their behavior, and looking at, how the baby responds to this. And you're getting
Yeah.
like much earlier signs and like of self-awareness than the classic Rouge test. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of
Mm-hmm.
that's what's exciting about early development, is sort of coming up with like the test to sort of, figure out the answers to these questions, because a lot of times that we're seeing signs of, self-awareness, in even in utero. But
Yeah.
obviously, if people, think, okay, we have to see these signs, by birth, infants, can differentiate themselves from another baby. But does that mean they can't do it earlier? But if we sort of think about ways to test babies earlier, like in utero,
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we find that they can do it even earlier. So
That's
that's it.
fascinating. I mean, do you have a conceptualized experiment of how that would even, like, how we could even do that?
Oh, they've already been done. Some people have already done studies like that in utero.
Fascinating.
So
What
maybe.
were the findings?
Oh, definitely that the babies are just distinguishing themselves from, showing early signs of self-awareness. Whether they're moving differently, if it's like themselves touching, or they I have to cut, or some I think are doing this with like a light somehow, like
Mm-hmm.
infrared light.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back to the original studies to really like
Sure.
look at the exact methodology that
Yeah.
they're
Yeah. Yeah.
using. But like in uh the studies at birth, it's like, somebody will either maybe stroke the baby's face, or the
Wow.
baby, or somebody will, maybe they have like a glove on, and the baby will stroke their own face to sort of see if, like, the baby's able to differentiate between the touch of self versus other. And we're able to see that answer is yes from birth.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. W- okay. Wow. Just, I mean, the implications of that are truly amazing. That's great. What you study learning. What are some of the first things that we pay attention to in the early years?
Oh, well, one of the first, the mothers, the most relevant stimuli for the baby, if you think about it, is, the parents, their voices, the way that they move,
Mm.
colors, what's coming at, I mean, we think of like the reflexes. So, but just,
Hmm.
what type of object is coming toward you, but how the tone of the voice. Babies can
Hmm.
distinguish from um, at birth,
Hmm.
like that, can already recognize the parent's voice.
I
They
mean, but
they,
that would make sense, right? Because it has. I mean, the the acoustic, they have had time to adjust to the acoustics from in utero, right? From being constantly around their parents, right? So that
right.
that actually makes a lot of sense. But it's wonderful to see that happen, like to see that manifest. Wow. Okay. What
Yeah,
else?
so I think, I did a fair bit of research on early eye contact. So like the quality of these cues are very important for the baby. The baby has to determine like is this information? I mean, think about the world, what's around us. Okay.
Yeah.
There's so many objects and sounds, and the baby needs to be able to figure out what's for me
Right.
versus versus what's not for me. Let's just
Right.
even we start there. Right. And
Right.
so, I think, the eye contact is a big one for the, early on. Is the
Yeah.
mother or parent there? Are they looking away? The timing of these signals is
Hmm.
important. I've done a lot of research on timing. And babies pick up on on the timing of those cues, like as early as we've tested them. Usually it's around, sometimes we see a transition around between 1 and 3 months of age, but at
Right.
least by 2 months of age, the social world really opens up, for the baby. And
2 months of age already, they're social beings.
sure, and that's when you see the first socially elicited smile. So anybody who has
Okay.
a little baby at home, you might be able to see something that looks like a smile, like a little bit earlier, but
Yeah.
um, really at like 2 months, you'll notice that the baby really like opens up and will giggle, and and if your timing is off, they're going to detect that. Or if you're interacting with the baby, but you're looking away, or even if you're just looking like right over their forehead, they'll detect that. And then,
Wow.
and then let's say you were showing the baby something, they're going to process what you're showing them better when they know that information is for them.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
how do we determine it's for them? We determine that because, hey, the timing is right, and the visual cues are right, and the intonation is right. Hey, I know this is for me. I better pay attention.
Right.
And now the baby sees this new object in their environment, and we're able to show, like through these event related potential studies that we've
Hmm.
done, the baby will process, let's say, an object or a sound more like deeply,
Hmm.
process it more effectively in the
Hmm.
context of what we call joint attention. So we knew that information is intended for us.
Hmm.
And
Fascinating.
yeah, and really relevant also for babies who, are at risk for autism as well. And really
Hmm.
anytime we see that babies or younger, kids, or even adults, you're not processing information, as well. Why is that? Is the hearing off? Is there too many other things in the environment? How can we, really just comes back to these, you know always come back to infancy.
Yeah.
You've got
Yeah.
something, I sort of, yeah.
Fascinating, fascinating. I think I one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you about this is, and this is actually a perfect segue into my next question. One of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you about this is because I think that there's right now, w- life is moving so fast, and there's this premium on intellect, very thoroughly thought out intellectual kind of higher brain function things, right? And we forget that, wait a second, this is all building on the foundation, on a foundation that is, you know just ancient, right? There's so much of that nature in there. And so the segues perfectly into the next question. What are your personal feelings of the nature versus nurture phenomenon, and as your from your observations and research? Because I think that my personal feeling is that, I mean, there's no more discussion. It's both, right? It's clearly, it's my personal feeling is that there's both. You still have people that feel like it's a dichotomy, or yeah, it's a this but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many reasons to believe that it is a combination, of course. I think maybe, as we, the we have these sort of deep evolutionary roots, and then as we sort of, we have all of the AI and the big data and whatever. I think maybe the more we're sort of pulled from what, the natural roots, the more important environment becomes. I think we will
Hmm.
notice that, like, okay, like people are more, stressed, right? Well, why are we stressed? We're stressed because we're not spending, if the enough time in nature, for instance.
Right.
Or where, right, I mean, that's like a classic one. Actually, I started studying, published a few studies on like early, biophilic design, sort of the influence of biophilic design on early, attention. But what sort of drove me to do that is I noticed even myself, like, oh, I'm out in a park. I'm in New York City, so things different from in Leipzig, and
Yeah.
um, get this information overload, right?
Right.
And then how
Right.
can we sort of, recover from this, or, regain our focus and our concentration and improve our attention? And I would notice that if I'm in a park, even for just 10 minutes, just sitting on a bench or taking a walk, that suddenly I could think clearly. And I thought,
Yeah.
wow, this is strange. Wow. Let me read as much as I can about this topic. And I did. And then, started doing some research on this. And yeah, so I mean, we know that it's a combination of nature and nurture. Now, what does that mean? For some people, may be able to spend a very long time in the city with information overload without needing to sort of, refresh, if you will,
Hmm. Hmm.
or whereas other people may be much more sensitive, right, to
Hmm.
this, and say,
Yeah.
and need, you know, more quiet, or maybe the exposure to nature has a much more dramatic effect on
Hmm.
some people than others. And that's also where, temperament, I'm sure, comes in. There have been no studies that I'm aware of on this, but that's where maybe the temperament comes into play, or, earlier experiences also. I do notice a difference between people who are born or at least raised in the city compared to those that are raised in the
Yeah.
suburbs, right? And
Sure.
they have different levels of tolerance. Probably in part due to their early experiences.
Sure. Sure. Absolutely. Now, and I think this is because you are not just a research psychologist, you are also an entrepreneur. And on the podcast, we specifically, I mean, I try to curate stories from life and business, and sometimes those things, very often they overlap, right? And so, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you have translated your specialty into business, into work, and then I want to ask about whether you think entrepreneurs are born or made.
Okay, great. First part of that question, I maybe they are born. I don't know. It seemed very natural for me. You're doing a lot of research, and then you'll start to see, or think, gee, am I doing a good enough job of getting this out to the public? Right.
Mm,
So that's sort of, I think, where some of this started. You start seeing the first few times you publish papers, you're just happy because, oh, hey, I published this paper, isn't that great? And then you want more, more, more. It's not good
yeah,
enough to have your paper published. Like, how is this benefiting society?
right,
And society isn't benefiting. The people with children are not sitting around reading empirical articles in journals, nor do
right,
most parents have time to read anything, for that matter. That's what
yeah,
I've.
yeah,
So, I thought, like, well, how can we get the research out in a more creative way that's like fun for the whole family? So that's sort of like what got me onto the brand of my Aegis for Banana brand, which is about like fostering creativity at home, and sort of creating products that sort of, so given all this research on early joint attention, we know that babies learn best in the context of others, right? But products that are designed for babies, well, I just said it, they're designed for babies. They're not designed for the adult in most cases,
right,
or they're not necessarily designed for joint attention. So
right.
how can we sort of artificially, like, create context for joint attention through the objects or through the games that we're developing?
Wow.
And so that's sort of what, led me to that, brand. And I'm always sort of creating new, games and designs and trying to get those licensed. I would love to manufacture and do all that on my own, but I do a lot of different things. Okay. So
Yeah,
I take
yeah.
the licensing route for that. And then, I as a professor started noticing another problem, which is like, okay, we're in these four walls of the classroom. students are not making the connections that they need to succeed. I had this great experience living in Germany, which again happened by kind of by accident. And in a sense, it wasn't that I sat around thinking, oh, I need to get to Europe to expand my, career or to make connections. That happened. And then you realize, wow, like this experience, like changed my life. And it changed my whole personality. People who I remember meeting a friend and her mother in New York, and I hadn't seen them since I graduated from high school. And the mother was like, "What happened to you? You never spoke. You were so quiet." She was in shock. I said, "Oh, I moved to Germany, and because I moved to Germany, and I didn't really know anyone there, and I didn't know the language and whatever, and I had to learn, and then it really changed me." And so that's something that became like a passion of mine. To how can I give that experience to others, especially or even if you don't have the opportunity to go abroad, how could I still give you that experience? How can I open your eyes to this world out there? So I started developing these micro internships with smaller companies in Europe and like connecting students that way. So they had sort of an introduction as opposed to like doing internships at, the classic, doing 3 months at a hospital or a large corporation.
Yeah.
So, there was that. Are they born or
made?
Made? Probably a combination. You need to be resilient. Are you born with resilience? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I do think the experiences are critical. I think that they are probably more made if I had to.
Okay.
I think the experiences drive people.
Okay. And the final question is, what experiences do you think influenced your own entrepreneurial journey, and how? Because very often, I mean, the halls of academia are full of amazing studies and a lot of knowledge that never sees the light of day, because there's no one there to say, wow, this is really valuable to the market. Like that should go out there, right?
They live in a tunnel, most academics. And
right.
A few things. I grew up in business. My father owned a paint and wallpaper shop in the town, Jackson Square Paint. So I grew up sort of, most kids grow up, I don't know, reading books at the library. I read wallpaper books. I love going to and like looking at the patterns and, and all of this still drives me today, sort of thinking about, okay, well, there's a whole literature on like what's too much information for babies, too much or too little, and what we call like the Goldilocks effect. So how can we sort of create that perfect environment? So, and then, the paint chips, that's another one. I mean, again, always playing with the paint chips. And it's kind of weird that don't worry about this wall. There'll be a new color the next time now I'm just kind of moved into this space. So why it looks a little, we have to work on the paint. But anyhow,
I love it.
Then I was, I think, so then, that's one sort of growing up in it, seeing the value of hard work, and just, so that's a big one. Two, the resilience. I come back, I think about, like, I always loved swimming as a kid. And I grew up right near the ocean, but in Massachusetts, where the waters can be quite cold, even in summer. So started maybe like 4 years old. And, the first couple classes, other kids are in the class, right? And, and then after like 3 or 4 classes, or God forbid, it's a cold, cloudy day, there's no one else there except for me. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's like, so my mother didn't say, oh, no, you're staying home today, still brought me to the class. The teacher would go out and, row their boat out because it was too cold for the teacher, do my, just sort of, showing up. And sometimes these things come back to me now. I also, as I think work in real estate, and a great firm that I'm involved in. It's Serene Powers Real Estate, and the broker who we work under showing up. It's about showing up. It's about answering that call, right? And being the person who is always just showing up. And
Right.
you always learn from those experiences. Yeah, not giving up. You have to be so resilient in business, because a lot of times you're going to realize your great ideas don't work, and you can't.
Sure.
Maybe you can put them aside for some time or whatever, and maybe you need to pivot. But in the end, you can't give up. Another one, coming back to swimming. I remember I wasn't going to pass. I was maybe 7 or 8, and was not going to make it to the next level of swimming because I couldn't dive. And
Okay.
diving is such an, obviously in life, you need to know how to dive, right? And so I think, like, a lot of parents probably would have said to their child, I think, oh, that's okay. Well, you're still wonderful. You're great. Reinforce. But not my mother. No, she took me to the pool, to the people who lived across the street. They had a nice built-in pool,
Yeah.
and she taught me again and again. No, again, to start on the knee, whatever. And then
Wow.
I had the test, and go to the ocean, and I do the perfect dive.
Wow.
And the teacher thought, my mother knew what was going, on, and all of that. And so I think that those experiences, I think, are critical, right? My
Sure.
mother wouldn't have said, oh, you're so great, don't worry, you'll do it next summer, or you'll do it, no,
Yeah.
that didn't fly with my mother. You're gonna
Interesting.
die. And then I still remember the same week having terrible ear pain, getting water in my ear because had to dive so many times.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Sure.
not like, oh, not like, oh, now you can't go in the water another 2 weeks. No, you go to the doctor, then you get a quick ear drops, and yeah, you maybe have like a little bit of pain, but you're gonna keep going. You're not
Yeah.
gonna have like I wasn't babied like I see so many, so often kids today, just like,
Yeah.
oh, everyone gets a trophy. We knew growing up, at least, and everyone gets a trophy,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, sure. And
I
that
think,
doesn't mean, and the fact that everyone doesn't get a trophy makes it all meaningful, right? And
absolutely,
that's why next time maybe you can get the trophy.
yeah,
Like it's
just
all meaningful.
yeah, just yesterday I was celebrating somebody at the real estate firm who was a top producer, and it was sort of my idea to celebrate this person because I was it's a relatively new firm and just wanted to surprise her. And it's exciting, not like to and I it's exciting not to be number one, right? Because now it gives you something to aspire to, right? That's where you want to be. And to also have people to sort of look up to who keep the bar really high, that is so critical also. I spent I there's so much so many sort of mundane and mediocre people that we can surround ourselves with,
Yeah.
and that we may think we can't get out of these situations,
Right.
but in fact we can. And you just have
Yeah.
to surround yourself with excellence. And now we have no excuses too, because we have the internet. So
Right.
you can spend yourself spend your time sitting around to some meeting talking about paper towels, or you can be on the internet connecting with people, or be out in the world, or doing something else and surrounding yourself with excellence, keeping the bar high and having
Yeah.
something to aspire to. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much for coming onto the call. You have to go to class
Yeah.
and teach class. I thank you so much for hopping on the call. Please come back. I
Yeah.
have so much that more that we can talk about.
Awesome.
And thank you so very much. We'll have all the information in the show notes about your socials and your company links and where people can find you.
Awesome.
So
Great.
thank you very, very much, and have a wonderful class and rest of the day.
Thanks, Alejandro. Stay well.